Today I'm out near Asheville, North Carolina, taking a look at what I think is one of the most interesting new vehicles available on sale for the 2024 model year. This is the all-new Chevy Trax. I've been intrigued by the new Chevy Trax for a number of reasons. First off, I think it looks pretty good. Let me know what you think of the styling down there in the comment section. Second, we have a lot of standard equipment. And third, we have a very low price tag. This starts at $21,495, and you get a lot of standard equipment, including Apple CarPlay and Android Auto integration on the inside. And if you get carried away with options, it's going to be around $28,000, absolutely top end. This Activ trim starts at $24,995, so if you want to get this look without all of the optional features, you'll be right around $25,000. That is significantly less expensive than the average new vehicle in North America. Actually, the base model is about half of the average new vehicle's MSRP in America. And we get things like LED headlights and a fairly attractive front end. But you don't get the availability of all-wheel drive. If you want all-wheel drive in your small Chevy crossover, you have to get the Trailblazer. Still definitely a decent deal, but certainly more expensive than the Trax. Without the availability of all-wheel drive, some folks might balk at calling the Trax a crossover, but it of course has the body cladding that you'd expect in a small CUV in this segment like the Corolla Cross or the Crosstrek. Dimensionally, this is also pretty close to those two options at 178.6 inches long, and it has reasonable ground clearance as well, 7.3 inches. So if you live in the snow belt and you're worried about clearance, but you don't need the extra traction of all-wheel drive or the extra expense, the extra fuel economy loss, etc. that all-wheel drive would bring, you might want to take a look at the Trax. With a wheelbase of 106 inches, this has a little bit more interior room than you find in the other really inexpensive option in this segment, the Hyundai Venue. So it's another reason you might want to choose this over that. The mini crossover looks continue out back, where we find a rear windshield wiper, a small spoiler up there, more of that cladding down here along with a smoky chrome strip and rear parking sensors in this Activ trim. This model does not get full LED taillights. In fact, no version of the Trax does. Incandescents only out back, even though we have LEDs up front. Unlike the Trailblazer, which has two 3-cylinder options, the Trax just gets one. A 1.2-liter 3-cylinder that is surprisingly smooth. Not everybody is a big fan of smaller displacement engines, but to be honest, I would rather have a 3-cylinder than a 4-cylinder because I think they sound cooler. At any rate, this produces 137 horsepower, 162 pound-feet of torque, so it's not overly quick. You'll go 0 to 60 in about 9.4 seconds, according to Chevy. But you do get a decent amount of grip because they put strangely wide tires on this. We also get decent fuel economy, 30 miles per gallon. And if you're not a fan of CVTs, there isn't one under this hood, which is another interesting twist. Instead, we have a standard 6-speed automatic. That's because Chevy says the 6-speed is actually less expensive than the in-house designed CVT that we find in the Trailblazer. Helping harness the incredible 162 pound-feet of torque from that 1.2-liter engine, I am kidding there, of course, but I'm not kidding about the tires. We get strangely wide tires, 225/55 R18s in this model. You will get 225 with tires in every trim, including the base model, which is definitely going to make this handle better than really any of the base competition. And if you want a better handling model, that would be the 2RS trim. You get 245 with tires all the way around. I haven't spent as much time as I would like in the Trax, but I did find the driver's seat to be pretty comfortable. This has the available optional power driver's seat. The seat bottom cushion adjusts for tilt. We then have a powered recline mechanism and two-way adjustable lumbar support. But the passenger seat remains manual in every trim. We have a tilt telescopic steering column with a decent range of motion. If you're a taller person than I am, you should know that the seat bottom cushion is a little on the short side for this segment, although not quite as short as the Hyundai Venue, but headroom is definitely very generous. I have about 3 inches of headroom left, and I could put the seat a little bit further down. Could also sit in a very upright position if I wanted to in here and still have lots of room. There is an advantage to not having all-wheel drive for the Trax. We don't have a hump back here, and pretty much all the competition has at least a small one. This has a completely flat electric vehicle-like floor because we don't have that drivetrain running through. And that means that people in the back are going to be more comfortable than in a wide variety of the competition. This rear bench is a little bit wider than we find in the Hyundai Venue, and we have gobs of legroom. This front seat's adjusted for me at 6 feet tall. You can see I have about 6 or 7 inches of legroom left. We have 82 inches of combined legroom in here and lots of headroom. Even though this center seat is higher off the ground than the outboard seating positions, I still have about ½ an inch of headroom. And sitting in the more bucket-like outboard seating position, that goes up to about 1.5 inches. The rear seats fold in a 60/40 fashion, and unlike some of the competition, a 60/40 rear bench is standard. As with any new affordable vehicle, there are going to be compromises inside. In the back, we have no armrest, no cup holders, and no air vents, but we do get USB charge points back here in the center console, USB-C and USB-A. There's also a pretty deep storage cubby right there where you can put your smartphone. The other advantage to not having all-wheel drive is they were able to maximize interior volume by not needing somewhere to put the drive shaft and the rear differential. So back here we find a larger than average cargo area, 25.6 cubic feet of storage space that opens up to 54.1 if you fold down the rear seats. Keep in mind again, $21,495 is what this vehicle will cost. Going down the rabbit hole, we find some additional storage space, but one missed opportunity, this isn't a two-stage load floor, so you can't put it in a lower position like that, but it does stay up in that position so that you can access the temporary spare tire. Yep, it does have a temporary spare, and we have a reasonable amount of storage space under that load floor as well. Now the Chevy engineers giveth and they taketh away. This has my least favorite kind of cargo cover, the rigid style, where you do have to pop it off and then leave it somewhere if your cargo is going to exceed that cargo volume. And you might be wondering, can I put it under the floor? The answer is rather unfortunately no. I tried pretty much everything and there is no way to fit that under there in the spare tire well. That's also a bit of a miss because it is awfully close. This is only about half an inch too wide to actually go under the floor when you don't want it. Let's start our interior tour in the Activ trim, which is one of the upper end trims. This one doesn't have the optional moonroof package, which is going to be available in certain versions of the Trax. That is going to reduce headroom just a little bit, but it's still pretty generous inside. And I like the fact that you can get the Activ trim without forcing you into the moonroof. We have fixed height shoulder belts for the driver and front passenger, Activ embossed in that headrest right there. You can see the adjustment button on that side, and fairly attractive interior finishes. I'll show you the other interior trims in just a bit, but let's focus on the Activ right now. You can see that we have perforations in the center section of this imitation leather, this sort of yellow accent stripe and accent stitching there. This interior doesn't really feel like it's as inexpensive as this vehicle is. As you can see, bolstering isn't terribly aggressive on the seat back and seat bottom cushions, so larger folks shouldn't have a problem. Of course, we find lots of hard plastics on the front doors, but we do find a soft touch armrest and a soft touch insert right there in the middle of the door. Also a bottle holder down at the bottom. And then somewhat surprising touches on the dashboard in terms of design. And based on what we've seen in things like the new Chevy Colorado and the GMC Canyon, some of this surprised me a bit because the price tag is so much lower here. The upper section of the dashboard is made from a hard touch injection molded plastic, but as you can see, it has some attractive triangles, and there's definitely a decidedly triangular theme to some of these elements in here. We also have a triangular texture here on this section. It fades from no texture to that triangle theme, and then air vents that remind me a little bit of some modern Mercedes models with those knurled elements inside, and those are 3D. They're not just color painted on there. We then have an open closing air vent inside. I'll show you how that operates in just a second. Moving over to the middle of the dashboard, we have a large 11-inch touchscreen infotainment system with Apple CarPlay and Android Auto support. This is running the same connected software that we find in a wide variety of different Chevy, GMC, and other models from General Motors. You can see we have some climate control functions right here in this display, but you can also control them from the physical knobs down below, so you have your choice of that. You'll find keyless entry and keyless go in most versions, but not all versions of this vehicle. Decently sized air vents there. 2 USB input ports, a regular USB and a USB-C. This is a storage cubby right here without wireless charging mat. Lane keeping assist over there, that is standard. We then have a auto start stop enable disable button over there. Pretty standard console shifter here. Manual mode over here on this side. 2 decently sized cup holders, definitely bigger than average for this segment. Another little storage area just behind. You can keep your key there. It has a pretty standard Chevy key with remote start in this trim. Padded rubbery center console that opens to reveal a decently sized and fairly deep storage area. Again, because we don't have all-wheel drive, this can be a little bit larger. On the driver's side, this is not a heads-up display. It's part of the collision warning system. It will flash red lights at you if it thinks you're getting too close. And then down here, we have an LCD instrument cluster that's pretty similar to the one we find in the Colorado and the Canyon. It does have a few different adjustable looks. This is gauge look 2. We also have a more traditional gauge look right there with a digital speedometer in the middle, analog-like tachometer around that. If I click and hold the button, we then have the option to move over to Gauge Look 3, which has kind of a Nouveau-themed platter thing going on there for the speed. If I then select again, we have a Vehicle Info option, which really is just fuel economy. There's also an infotainment option there, so you can see the readouts from your connected infotainment system, but no moving map display or things like that. There's also a clean option if you'd simply want the speed. The steering wheel is a 3-spoke unit with a split bottom spoke. The controls for the cruise control over here on this side, also a heated steering wheel button, a nice touch to have in a vehicle this price tag. These control that multifunction LCD cluster over there. We also have a voice command button and a phone hang-up and pick-up button there. This allows us to change our media source with the on-screen menu. On the left side of the steering wheel, we find the controls for the auto headlamps. Auto high beams are also standard. Now let's take a closer look at the air vent I mentioned earlier. You can see on the inside, we have the control for opening and closing that vent. It's kind of an interesting design. It is a little bit awkward to use at first, but you will get used to it. You sort of grab there and move that around, but it has a substantial feel to it, which I did not expect. And again, these really 3D elements inside that I didn't expect either. Oddly enough, I think I like the LT interior the most, mainly because of the fabric that we have on the seats. We have the same sort of yellow accent stitching here, but instead of an imitation leather seat, we have fabric on the seat front with a cool triangular pattern that matches more with the dashboard. You can see that we start with light gray with no triangles basically, and then we go all the way down there to all triangles in that black section, and then it fades all the way back to the lighter gray up front. It really goes with the triangular theme on the dashboard. And speaking of the dashboard, we get these shocking yellow accents right there on the same air vents that we find in the other model with the same knurled components there. Obviously, if you want something a little bit more discreet, you could take a look at the other trim levels, but I actually sort of like the integration of those yellow accent pieces. Same big screen there in the dashboard, same single zone automatic climate control down there, same center console there as well. Also, same steering wheel over here with that partial, or rather I should say full but small LCD instrument cluster. If you want something a little bit sportier, the base RS trim has definitely a very 1980s fabric theme going on there. Lighter colored on the back and then darker colored on the seat bottom cushion, but very similar textures. And then over on the dashboard, of course, because red says sporty, we get red accents on everything. We also get a unique steering wheel with perforated leather on the outside, black section down here on the bottom, and a flat bottom design. Getting the top end 2RS trim retains the same red accents here, but we get an RS logo there. Piano black plastic, which is not exactly my favorite, and we lose some of the triangles. And then we get unique upholstery with the RS badge there, another RS tag right there on the seat back cushion, red accents and red piping, sort of like in the Activ trim, only red. Don't worry, I didn't forget about the base trim. Here it is. It uses the same seat fabrics that we find in the 1RS trim, except that we have the blue accent stitching on the side. Same sort of 1980s pattern going on there on the seat back and the seat bottom cushion, again in that contrasting color right there. And this has blue accents on the vents and on the dashboard. I have to say that the red accents and the blue accents are my favorite. Let me know which color you prefer down there in the comments section. This does have bigger changes inside than the other trims though, because we have the smaller LCD infotainment system. This is the only trim you're going to find it in. It is an 8-inch system. It still supports CarPlay and Android Auto, and it runs a slightly different version of Chevy's software. You'll notice this is the older software version from the Chevy lineup. We have a physical power button over here and a home button right there as well, because those are part of that software package. Below this, we have manual single zone climate control, so no auto climate control going on in here. Same 2 USB inputs, and the rest of the center console design is basically the same. Then over on the driver's side, we have another big change. We have a regular analog instrument cluster with a small LCD in the middle. Physically, this is actually larger than the 8-inch screen, and it has a different binnacle over it. I actually think that this general binnacle design is more attractive than in the LCD model, but of course we don't get the LCD part, which is a bummer. Just that small multifunction screen there in the middle. Up in this area, we get a few warning lights and status lights as well, like the lane departure warning system. And then moving out from there, we have a steering wheel that is somewhat between worlds. It has these imitation perforations over here like you find in the RS trims, except that this is a urethane steering wheel, not a leather-wrapped wheel, so it's definitely not going to feel quite as nice. No flat bottom down there, but those imitation perforations continue around. We have controls for the cruise control over here on this side, and the infotainment controls over here on this side. You'll notice that the buttons are a little bit different because the infotainment software and system is different. Last but not least, no keyless go in this model, so you actually have a key. It's a switchblade variety. You have to stick it in there and actually turn it. The horror of not pressing the button. Now it's time to get the Trax out on the road. The first thing you'll notice is just a little hint of tire squeal as you accelerate. Also, a pretty throaty engine sound from just 1.2 liters. That's because this is a 3-cylinder engine. It would actually sound a little anemic to a lot of folks' ears if this was a 4-cylinder engine at 1.2 liters. You might not think of this way, but a 6-cylinder engine has very similar harmonics to a 3-cylinder engine, especially since we think of V6s when we think of 6-cylinder engines and those 2 banks of 3 cylinders. What's weird about that harmonically is that a V8 doesn't sound like a 4-cylinder. 4-cylinder doesn't sound like a V8, but it does hold true with 3s and 6s. So this may actually confuse some of your friends as to what kind of engine is under the hood. We also have that stepped automatic transmission, which feels very, very normal. Unfortunately, that does likely reduce the 0 to 60 time, or I should say increase the 0 to 60 time. According to Chevy, this should go 0 to 60 in about 9.4 seconds. That feels about right. It feels right around the 9-second mark. But in a lot of traffic situations, this feels peppier than you might think. It has a decent amount of low-end torque, so it has a decent amount of pull to it, and the handling is absolutely excellent. We have a relatively light curb weight in this vehicle, again, thanks to the design not including all-wheel drive or even optional all-wheel drive. And then we have those wide tires. Tomorrow I'm going to be able to drive the 2RS trim, so I'm just going to go ahead and tack my driving impressions to that to the end of this drive section. But already this Activ trim handles really quite well. To be honest, it's been quite some time since we've had an affordable, fun-to-drive vehicle under $25,000 from any manufacturer in North America, and it's been even longer since we've had one from General Motors. The Trax is that vehicle, and I didn't really expect that when I first saw it. I liked the look of the interior, I liked the price tag, I especially liked the price tag, but I thought that there would be more compromises out on the road, and oddly enough, there are incredibly few. I would love to see more gears in this transmission. I would obviously love to see a little bit of extra power, but all of that would have increased the price tag, and the mission of this is to deliver this fun-to-drive nature, roomy interior, decent driving dynamics for a very low sticker price. Again, you will find faster options out there. You'll find better handling options out there. You'll find more fun-to-drive options. But you won't find any of those options combined with the price tag that is under $25,000. And you can get a very nicely equipped LT trim for about $24,000. That's probably where I would stop in this lineup. You aren't going to get the imitation leather upholstery that we have in this model, but other than that, the rest of this interior is very, very much the same. The way that Chevy has decided to split the lineup in the Trax is really interesting. We're now driving the 2RS trim. It's important to know that there are 2 different versions of the Trax RS. There's the Trax 1RS, which has the same tire width as the rest of the lineup, 225 width. It also still has the crank start and the smaller screen in the dash. It's really just the sort of RS look on the base trim. But this 2RS trim, this is the co-equal top-end version. Versus the Activ trim, we don't get a power driver's seat, and that is a bit of a bummer because after having spent an hour in this vehicle or so, there's no additional lumbar support and you can't adjust the seat bottom cushion for tilt. On the other hand, we do get the cooler steering wheel and we get wider tires, 245 width tires. These are some of the widest in the segment, and you will certainly notice it out on this winding mountain road here. This grips incredibly well, even though the road is very wet. This is probably the best handling small vehicle in America, whether we're talking about a sedan or a hatchback or a crossover. This is absolutely fantastic. If you want better handling than this, you're really going to be taking a look at the very small number of high performance options in the segment, like a Hyundai N or something like a Civic Type R. Of course, the big thing to keep in mind is that we don't get any extra power versus the rest of the Trax lineup, so still just under 140 horsepower. This is not going to be a speed demon. It's still going to go 0 to 60 in over 9 seconds, but the stopping distance is going to be excellent and the handling is improved. Also, what is surprising is that today, I am filming this section on a different day than we filmed the Activ trim. We were able to drive out on some rougher roads, of course in the rain, and the active noise cancellation that is standard on every Trax is obvious. This cabin is much quieter than we had both expected. I'm actually out here with Brian right now, and compared to something like a Toyota Prius, which is not really the same thing as this, but you could consider one as a cross shop because that is going to save you money in fuel, and it's not going to be too far off the top end price of this. Something like that Prius is louder. Also likely louder are going to be most versions of the Hyundai Elantra, etc. In reality, the most direct competitors for the Trax are going to be the Hyundai Venue and the Nissan Kicks because they're also lifted front-wheel drive hatchbacks. And this comes across as a more premium alternative to those in terms of the driving nature and the way this handles out on the road. Definitely wider tires than we find on the Nissan or in the Hyundai, and also I think a better ride quality in here also. Certainly a quieter cabin. Now, as is pretty common in inexpensive vehicles, we don't have a fully independent suspension in the rear. But we also don't find a fully independent suspension in something like a Mazda 3, so take that for what it's worth. But the rear suspension is pretty well behaved even out on rougher road surfaces. This winding road is not quite as smoothly paved as the one we were driving the base trims in yesterday, and this does fairly well. I'm surprised by that. It doesn't become upset over these broken pavement areas in the corners, etc. Obviously, you're going to get a little bit more suspension motion on the opposite side versus a fully independent suspension, but the payback is that bigger cargo area in the rear. Independent suspensions are larger physically than non-independent suspensions, so it saves a lot of space and you get that extra space back in that cargo area. Bottom line, the Trax is a surprising amount of fun out on the road, and if you're looking for the best handling entry in this inexpensive crossover segment, this is hands down going to be that option. Oddly enough, even if you're looking at the base trims, because we get surprisingly wide tires and a pretty light curb weight. I don't have official US specs, but the Chinese market and Korean market version of this weigh only 3,100 pounds. So this is fairly light for the segment, and you have 225 width tires standard, 245 width tires optional. This is the kind of vehicle that is an awful lot of fun to drive out on a road like this. You are going to be digging pretty deep into the throttle. I mean, you can floor this and not get too much more acceleration, but it's still an awful lot of fun. Now let's get to the important part. How much is a Trax going to set you back? Well, again, a lot less than a lot of the competition. The base version is the LS trim. It starts at $21,495. That gets you a smaller infotainment system. It's an 8-inch one, but it still offers CarPlay and Android Auto. You get 225 with tires, but on 18-inch wheels. The spare tire is standard, but you lose the automatic climate control and get a manual single zone version. From that point, you step up into the 1RS trim for $23,195. It's a pretty decent jump over the base version, but that gets you the big 11-inch LCD infotainment system you see inside and heated seats up front. From that point, you move up into the LT trim, which gives you keyless go and the option of adaptive cruise control and a heated steering wheel. If you live in a colder climate, that's probably where you want to go with that heated steering wheel. And of course, adaptive cruise control is fantastic. The LT trim is $23,395, but of course, with those options, you'll get over $24,000 on it. From that point on, you end up in the top two trims, which are the 2RS and the Activ trim. Same price, $24,995, but they're kind of different interpretations of the upper end trim. The Activ trim gets the look you see here with the black wheels, 225 width tires, and for some reason a power driver's seat. Apparently, active people love powered seats, and sporty people do not, because on the 2RS, you don't get the power driver's seat, but you do get the wider tires, and I think the more attractive wheels as well. I'm not the biggest fan of black wheels on any vehicle. Then there are a few options that you can add to the 2RS or the Activ trim. The way Chevy has done the option packages is a little bit interesting. Neither the Activ trim nor the 2RS trim gets adaptive cruise control standard. It is available in LT, Activ, and 2RS, but it's an option on all three of those trims, as is the power sunroof. And if you get the power sunroof, you do get a wireless charging mat inside. To be honest, I like the fact that you can get the top end trim without the sunroof because it means that taller folks will have more headroom up front. I do love a sunroof, but it is difficult to find a vehicle in this size and price category that's suitable for people 6 feet tall and over. A lot of them have very limited headroom, especially in the back seat area, and this is one of the roomiest. That is, of course, the trade-off for not having all-wheel drive, as I keep saying in the video. If you want all-wheel drive, that's going to be the Trailblazer. It is fairly similar to this in terms of its packaging and arrangement, but it is going to be a lot more expensive, even if you don't choose that all-wheel drive option. And on the inside, it's not necessarily going to be that much roomier. This is laser focused on a low sticker price, a low average price, and a lot of room on the inside. And I think Chevy has done an excellent job with that combination of features. If you're shopping for a Hyundai Kona or a Toyota Corolla Cross or any of the options in this segment that are available with front-wheel drive, keep in mind that most of those shoppers opt for the front-wheel drive model. You would do well to put the Chevy Trax on your shopping list. You'll find a bit more ground clearance than average than a lot of those models there. We have a much roomier interior than average and a much smaller sticker price, which is definitely one of the things that I love. Let me know what you think about all that down there in the comment section, and be sure and check out the related video because our editor in Detroit, Brian, is actually considering a Chevy Trax for his next new vehicle, which would be a huge departure from the Hyundai Veloster N that he has had up until now. Let's see if he can actually live with just 137 horsepower instead of well over 200. See all of you next week.